Hello, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. My name is Jonah Jonathan, and thanks for tuning in. Today I have the rare opportunity to share with you an interview I conducted with world-renowned jazz saxophonist and classical saxophonist and educator and jazz scholar, Dr. Dave Demsey. Dr. Demsey is one of the world's best when it comes to jazz education and co-leads the jazz program at William Paterson University with jazz pianist Mulgrew Miller. Dr. Demsey has worked with the who's who of jazz, including Clark Terry, Paquito D'Rivera, Milt Hinton, James Williams, and Rufus Reid, just to name a few. In addition, Dr. Demsey is an excellent classical performer and has worked with the New York Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Opera, and the American Saxophone Quartet. During our interview, which took place at William Paterson University's Jazz Archives, we discussed Dr. Demsey's early life as well as his path into academia. Other things we discuss include his relationship with Clark Terry and his chance to work with the great jazz saxophonist, the late jazz saxophonist Michael Brecker. So I hope you guys enjoy watching. I'm also going to be including a separate video that I did with Dr. Demsey about William Paterson University's Jazz Archives. He gives us a little tour in that video. So continue watching. We have some more interviews coming up, including one with Mulgrew Miller, another with Michelle Rosewoman and jazz pianist Andy Jaffe, as well as the jazz guitarist David Gilmour and the jazz vibraphonist and drummer Kevin Norton. And please comment on this video and subscribe to this series if you haven't done so already, and share these videos with your friends and get the word out about the Jazz Musician's Voice, and stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the wonderful opportunity to interview world-renowned jazz saxophonist and educator, Dr. Dave Demsey. Now, Dr. Demsey, for people who aren't familiar with your background, could you tell us a little bit about how you initially got started in music and eventually jazz? I understand you're from the Boston area?
Yeah, I am from the Boston area, Winchester, Massachusetts, right about 8 miles outside of Boston. Mm-hmm. And my musical background started in the band in 4th grade, and choosing the saxophone was kind of a accident almost, you know, where we all stood in line and band director had a trumpet and an alcohol swab. I still remember how awful it tasted, and I played and it sounded like a farm animal, and he said, well, you're not going to be a brass player. Boom, right there, that was it. And I ended up playing saxophone, and I mean, to make a way too long story short, my musical background was kind of almost backwards. I was going to be an architect until my junior year in high school, and I got into this all-city group in Boston called the Greater Bostonians. It was like a big band, strings, and 40 singers. We had our own arranger, and it was a really high-level group, and that's when the magic of playing with good people, playing good music. We made a recording every year. We played at Symphony Hall in Boston. We rehearsed at one of the big local TV stations. So all of a sudden, it wasn't just what I did in high school and did at home. It was, you know, a big deal.
Got to be something.
Well, yeah, I really felt like I was playing with people who were better than me.
Sure.
And I was getting pushed. And that's when also I got connected into sax lessons at Berkeley with Joe Viola, who was head of the woodwind department there at Berkeley.
Cool. That was like jazz or classical?
Well, that's where the backwards part happened. Most of my study with him was classical saxophone. Mm-hmm. And I was playing lead alto in a high school jazz band, and not much improvising, too scared, at an early age. I was Mr. Music at my high school, might blow my reputation, I mean, this was not a conscious thing, but I still have a perfectionist gene there. It may be what makes me a good administrator, but it's not a good thing to be a perfectionist if you're an improviser, because it's all about letting it out there and just being super prepared and then letting stuff happen. And so that was difficult for me at age 15, 16. And then I went to college, and again was playing kind of lead alto in the jazz band. And I was mentored by a gentleman named Don Stratton, who was a trumpeter, who very gifted teacher who had played with a couple of big bands that Gil Evans was arranging for. He had played with Charles Mingus a little bit, played with Parker a couple of times on, he was at that level.
Sure.
Played with Elliot Lawrence's band, played with Neil Hefti's band, etc. So he was kind of on the scene in New York. And then he went back up to New England, which is where he was from, to teach. And I just happened to go to school at that moment when he had come back from New York. And I was going to be a band director at that point. High school band director. That was what I was aiming for. I got a music ed degree. And it was Don who said, you ought to think about going to New York. And I said, New York? What do you mean, New York? Am I good enough? Well, yeah, you ought to go see. I think maybe you are. So I ended up studying with Joe Allard, who was a legendary sax teacher. And some of Joe's other students were Dave Liebman, Mike Brecker had just finished studying with him, and that's how I met Mike. I knew Mike for 30 years, thank God. Dave was still taking a lesson once in a while, so I met Dave at that point. Pepper Adams had studied with him, Eric Dolphy had studied with him, Coltrane studied a bit. I mean, he taught everybody, you weren't anybody in New York if you hadn't done some lessons with Joe. And I was really lucky because at Juilliard I ended up studying with Joe every week for 3 years. So I did a lot with him and learned a ton from him.
Wow, that's great.
And Joe was the one, even though I was at Juilliard, which was the great bastion of non-jazz anywhere at that point. Today there's a jazz program there, but back then you didn't say that word, but there was this Marsalis kid there. And Wynton was a freshman, and I was a first-year grad student, so I'm 4 years older. But he was, worlds better than everybody. He was bionic at that stage. And he still is. He can do stuff on the trumpet that you're just not supposed to be able to do. He can just make stuff. God gave him chops that are just meant to sit against the trumpet mouthpiece. And then he had a work ethic that was killing. So I can still remember being confronted with that.
Yeah.
And saying, am I going to sort of bury my head and say, okay, I'm just going to do my thing, or am I going to get with this guy? And I just made the decision. I said, I have to always surround myself with people who are better than me, who can do stuff I can't do. And I could just feel that rocket take off,
Sure.
Playing, we had a little rehearsal band together. This was just before 1980. And I was going to stay in New York. My wife and I got married in 1980. She was living in Philadelphia. Now she's on the faculty. Karen is on the faculty at William Paterson here. A flutist, very fine flutist. And we had plans to stay in New York. I had students. I had gigs. I was doing some club date stuff, starting to get in maybe to a little Broadway subbing. So, my little life raft was up on the surface. I was okay. I had an apartment in Manhattan. And then I got offered a job up at the University of Maine as a 1-year sub for somebody they had just let go, that had left. And they asked me if I would do a year. And I remember talking about it because this was last minute. This was like in July for the following September. And I remember thinking, well, tenure track jobs don't grow on trees. This is something that I might want to take advantage of. And, I'm kind of low man on the totem pole here in New York anyway. I mean, I've got gigs happening, but it's not like I'm out there. I may know Mike Brecker and can pick up the phone and talk to him, but it's not like he's calling me for gigs. I'm
Sure.
not walking away from a career yet. So I went up there, and 1 year turned into 12.
Yeah, so
And we were in Maine. I taught at the University of Maine at Augusta for 12 years, and that's a multi-campus system, like a lot of state universities.
Dean of Arts and Communication over there?
Right, the last 2 years
Okay,
there.
last 2
I was on
years.
the music faculty for a decade, and then got volunteered to be a substitute dean.
Oh, okay.
And the substitute, you know, I'm glad I did it. It was an amazing experience, but I feel as though I got put on the planet to teach this music and to play. And I remember there was one period that year where I went a full month and never opened my saxophone case. And it just felt physically uncomfortable. I felt ill, you know. I felt like I hadn't slept in a month, or I hadn't got, you know what I mean? It just felt so awful to not play. And the job at William Paterson came up, and I applied in January and hadn't heard anything. And as it turns out, in May, suddenly they called me for an interview, and they were looking for me. It was an unusual situation, really, because a lot of times with a job at this level, with a program at this level, it's kind of an inside thing. They already know who they want, and they've got somebody good pegged, and boom. And they wanted somebody who had, you know, major administrative experience, who was a player. And I guess how many deans are tenor players? You know, not many,
so you
apparently.
got that.
Yeah, so I just, again, sort of right place at the right time, and I feel there's a lot of people that have told me that my job is one of the best jobs in jazz education. I don't doubt it. I don't take it for granted. And now, amazingly, this is 20 years I've been here. And,
yeah,
you know,
it's quite a long period of time.
That's for sure.
And you've been here with 3 different directors of the program now, starting with Rufus Reid, and then James Williams and Mulgrew Miller now.
Correct.
And could you tell us a little bit, like, how it was to work with Rufus? And then,
Oh, man. Yeah, Rufus is a wonderful, wonderful teacher, wonderful person, first and foremost, great musician. And he and my predecessor, Marty Criven, the gentleman who sort of invented this jazz program and invented the Jazz Room Concert Series, which is coming into its 35th year next year. The program's coming into its 40th year. The person who invented all that stuff was Marty Criven. And Marty just passed away a month and a half ago, at late September. Very sudden. He was 81, but nobody expected it because he was so healthy. He was doing so well. And he was the person who hired Thad Jones. And that move kind of set a pattern for all other jazz programs today. It was the first school, as far as I know, it was the first school anywhere who had hired a major league major league famous jazz musician to be on the tenured full-time faculty. We were the first school to do that, and as far as I know, and I mean, certainly, you know, Gary Burton was at Berkeley, but he had been a student there. He kind of grew into being Gary Burton while he was there. Thad was already a phenomenon when he got hired. And so, when Thad went to live in Denmark, Marty hired Rufus. Marty retired about halfway through. Rufus was here for 20 years. And then halfway through Rufus's 20, Marty retired. Rufus hired me. And so I was here for, I believe it was actually 9 years with Rufus. And then after he retired to be Rufus Reid, you know, to compose. He's as much a composer now as he is a bassist. You know, for orchestra, for large ensembles, not just jazz. He was always a great jazz composer, but now he's a composer, you know, in every sense of the word. And then James Williams succeeded Rufus. And I would have thought that James would have been another 20-year man, you know. He loved this job. He loved the students. I remember about 3 months after he was here, we were sitting next to each other in a dialogue day. and the students are playing, and he turns to me and he says, he whispers in my ear, he says, "You dirty stinker." And I said, "What?" And he said, "When I took this job, I had no idea whether I would want to be here. I felt like I was a player, maybe I'll try it out." And he said, "I am totally in love with these students." He said, "I go out on the road with my trio or whatever," and he said, "all I can think about is my students and getting back to them." Mm-hmm. So he was really in love with it, and as I said, I think would have stayed here a long, long time, and he died way too early. He was only 53, died in 2004. So and we still miss him, and one of the collections here is his archive, which we'll look at later on. Sure. But after James passed, perhaps the best person on the planet to succeed James would have been Mulgrew. Mm-hmm. When James graduated from Memphis State University, the next pianist at the school and with that band was Mulgrew Miller. After James left Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, there were, I think, maybe one, maybe two pianists between the two of them, but eventually Mulgrew ended up being the pianist with Art Blakey. Mm-hmm. So, in a way, it was somehow destiny that Mulgrew would succeed James here. And now Mulgrew's been here 7 years, and he's an amazing partner, and again, great musician. The students love him, and I think in a way that's one of the successes of the program, that it's led by, kind of co-led by that, I call it the two-headed monster. You know, you have the administrator person who plays the music and understands the music and is in the music in partnership with somebody who spent his life on the road playing the music, who's now dedicated to teaching. So it's that overlap that really makes the program
it's
work.
a master formula. You know, I'm a graduate myself of the program, so
you sure are.
It was really great to be in ensembles with Mulgrew and mm-hmm. learn from his experience. And
yeah.
At the same time, learn from you the other side of the career, the history side and the academic side of jazz. So I guess you and Mulgrew are continuing to push the boundaries of the jazz program.
I hope so.
And turning out a bunch of us young, talented musicians onto the scene. Where do you see William Paterson's jazz program headed in the next few years?
It's a great question. Well, you know, the program's one of the oldest in the country. I mean, it's been here for 40 years next year. But the master's program is newer. It's been here, I think this is year 11. Mm-hmm. So that's still growing and evolving. I can see the connections deepening between our jazz program and the other programs in the department, which is another rarity, that you can get the jazz degree and also get a sort of a hybrid degree in music ed, all 4-year degrees still in music ed or in music management or in audio recording, or new last year we have jazz and classical performance together. And now we just started this fall a brand new degree in popular music. It's kind of a social media degree. It's not a performance degree, but it's a degree for people who are already kind of in the business a little bit, but want to know how to better promote their bands, how to promote their recordings, how to work in the internet, songwriting, etc. I can see that our program will go in that direction. And then another important direction is this archive. This archive is 3 years old, and I'm just now starting to discover what an unbelievably powerful teaching tool it is, you know. I mean, I knew that it would have impact on the jazz majors. You know, they're over here all the time, listening to the records, watching videos, studying the materials of these three men whose collections are here. But I didn't realize the depth of the impact that, you know, of the three, only Clark is still here, thank God. Yeah. You know, and it's, you know, Clark was the one who sort of invented this. When Clark came to us and told us that he wanted his donation, to his collection to be here, that he wanted to donate his collection, you know, I asked why, you know, why not the Smithsonian, you know? And his reply became the title of this archive. And he said, oh, places like that are for dead people. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the Smithsonian, I mean, with all due respect, it's one of our nation's great resources, but they only can display like 0.1% of what they have. And he said, I've dedicated my whole life to teaching to young people, to spreading the word about jazz. He said, I want my music to be connected to an academic program. I want my charts to be played. I want these horns to get passed down the line in the trumpet section. I want my words to be studied. I want my legacy to be exposed to a continuing stream of young, talented jazz musicians. And he said, we've been doing our homework and we feel like William Paterson's the place that's doing it right, that can offer them that. So I mean, that's the greatest tribute anybody could pay. And so this has now become the Living Jazz Archives, that's the name. And the whole, of course, the originals, we have Clark's, about 100 of Clark's original big band charts, the original ones from that big bad band. We have about 60 Thad Jones pencil scores. We have James Williams' whole record collection and about 600 cassettes. We have over 100 of Clark's albums, et cetera, horns, awards, documents.
It's amazing.
And of course, the trick is, how do you protect the stuff and have it used at the same time? And the way we do that is, the originals are stored archivally in acid-free environments, so that you have an acid-free sheet of paper between every page. They're in an acid-free folder, in an acid-free container, in a room where there's basically low lighting, low temperature, etc., you know, good humidity. And then we make one work copy of each of those charts so that the band can have it in the books, but you don't have to, of course, you're not going to take something from the 1960s and pass it out to the big band. As much as I love and trust them, you're not going to pass it out and say, okay, you know, take your folders with you. All of a sudden a folder disappears, things get ripped, things get spilled on, whatever. And that's not the way to protect somebody's legacy. So we have that one work copy that the students use and learn from, and then the originals are stored here forever.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's really going to be a unique opportunity for people to explore these artists' work for the next generations.
Yeah, well, you know, Clark and I have talked about that, you know, and he says, you know, I'm old, he's 91 now, but he said, you know, it's not about me, it's not about you, Demsey, it's about our grandkids, people that haven't even been thought of yet. They need to come in, and the whole idea is to make this place so immediate, have such impact that it feels like you've been hanging out with Clark, that it feels like you've been hanging out with Thad, because the stuff is so immediate, you know. Yeah, it's so, I mean, you can, to actually, you know, see the pencil score of Thad Jones, you know, Groove Merchant, something that probably every high school kid in the country who's been in a jazz band has played that chart. To see the pencil of that is mind-blowing to most young people, you know, because you can see where, oh, this must be some neat, clean copy that Thad made. And then you see halfway across the page, he like changed one voicing. And you realize that's the work copy, that his oral perception, his imagination was so vivid that the chart was already in his head, that all he had to do was go, boom.
Right.
You know, a lot of Thad's charts, there are no score. Thad wrote the parts one by one, wrote the complete alto sax part, then the complete second alto part. I mean, that's incomprehensible to most of us, that he could imagine the chart that vividly, that he could hear every part individually without a score. You know, the guys in the band tell stories about him sitting in airports and train stations just copying out parts, but there's no score. Amazing.
Okay,
Genius.
so actually moving backward, I want to talk a little bit about your stellar educational and collegiate background. You graduated from the University of Maine at Orono in the late 70s.
I did.
And then you continued on to Juilliard for your master's in music. Could you tell us about how the music education program was back then that you
Oh, it was great.
studied?
I mean, I found going to a school from a more rural state, you know, sometimes you can feel a little disconnected. Like, yeah, I'm good here. I'm the guy playing all the solos with the big band. I'm the guy playing the concerto with the concert band. I'm like big dude on campus here, but New York, like, am I gonna hang? Am I gonna be good enough? And of course, New York will immediately tell you that. You know, in one day in New York, you know exactly how good you are
where you
and aren't.
stand?
You know, and you know, I found that I was giving homework help to people from a lot more famous schools. So it was only when I got to Juilliard that I realized how good my background was. My main, the background that I'd gotten at UMaine, not just in saxophone. I studied with a gentleman named Lewis Hall there, by the way, who was great, an oboist first, but he really taught me, he kind of brought me from being a talented kid who could learn really quickly and kind of gave me a practice ethic, gave me a work ethic, like how to learn, how to really become a professional musician. He took me from basically high school to Juilliard, you know. So, but it wasn't just that. It was music theory, ear training, history, all the background I got there. So it was a really solid education that I would recommend to anybody. You know, it's still a great school. And then, yeah, making the jump to Juilliard, all of a sudden you're on a world stage there, you know. And yeah, I found that I could compete, but at the same time, as I said, it wasn't just Wynton. There were other really great players there. Danny Block, who's still in New York, Dan Block. We just had Nadia Salerno Sonnenberg, amazing violinist. She was there at the same time in some of my classes. Ken Hitchcock, great saxophonist who still played Broadway and done a ton of things. We played together quite a bit since then. I mean, there were a lot of good players there.
Yeah, you know, could you tell us a little bit about the scene, like how were the gigs and the sessions? I mean, jam sessions must have been something else back then.
Well, it wasn't that. It was actually, this was the late 70s, around 1980. So it was actually, you know, yeah, for somebody younger, you would, like, the difference between like Coltrane's time and that would seem to be the same thing, but it was actually very different because the 70s were the heyday of jazz fusion.
Yeah,
you know, so we were talking about basically to find an acoustic jazz gig in New York was very rare. The only club really that was consistently booking acoustic jazz acts was the Vanguard. There was no fusion in the Vanguard, but you know, I mean, Sonny Stitt would come to Sweet Basil once in a while, but also it was like Gil Evans' band was there, which was basically a rock band. Chris Hunter playing alto, and Jocko would play bass a lot, and you know, it was a rock band. Yeah. And then probably one of the most popular clubs in town was 7th Avenue South, which was co-owned by the Brecker brothers, by Mike and Randy Brecker. And that, of course, featured them. That was their venue, but also, you know, Dave Sanborn, Bob Mintzer's big band played there. It was much more of an electric world. You know, most of the sessions that I went to, most of the music that I was playing was electric at that time. And that was just at the moment when I was there, 79, 80, when the first major thing that happened was Dexter Gordon came back. He'd been living in Europe at that point for, I'm blowing it here, 12 years, I don't know, 15, a while, since the 60s. And the Vanguard brought him back, and they didn't know if anybody would come. Like they thought maybe everybody just forgotten who Dexter was. Well, the lines were around the corner to get in that club. And all of a sudden, people realized that there was an audience for acoustic jazz. And then another major thing happened. There was the first in decades concert hall tour by an all-star group they called the Milestone Jazz Stars. Check this little group out. It was a quartet: Sonny Rollins, McCoy Tyner, Ron Carter, and gone. Played drums
Tony?
with Miles. No one would think that. I'm blanking. Sorry.
Oh, it's
And
okay.
my sincere apologies to that person. I cannot think of his name. I can see it like he's standing here. Anyway, it'll come to me.
That's
And so
amazing.
they played Carnegie Hall, they played Symphony Hall in Boston, they played Orchestra Hall in Philadelphia. Jazz had not been presented in these spaces since Benny Goodman. So all of a sudden, there was this kind of resurgence, you know. And then, who knew that my young classmate Wynton would become sort of like the standard bearer for that whole thing. He got hired by Art Blakey and started to get, that was happening while he was in school. I remember one day he said, "You got to come to McKell's." Art Blakey asked me to sit in. This is going to be amazing. I get to play with Art. So we all went, hung out. That's where I met James. James was the pianist, and I think had something important to do with getting Wynton into that band. I've always suspected. The other guys, Bobby Watson and Bill Pearson, the people who were in that band know that story much better than me. But then Wynton was out on the road with Art. Herbie Hancock heard him and connected for the Columbia contract with him.
Sure.
So Wynton toured with Herbie, Ron, and Tony. Wynton toured with Miles' 60s legendary rhythm section, and again, like sold out, you know. And all of a sudden, the fusion era started to kind of sputter. That was still happening, but all of a sudden, these acoustic acts started to be major stars. You know, like McCoy started to be. He couldn't get a gig. He had gigs,
driver,
but yeah, I mean, he couldn't. It wasn't that he had somehow sounded any worse. He sounded just as great as ever, but he was just playing like small venues. And all of a sudden, people like McCoy, Sonny, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, like Tony had the Tony Williams Lifetime. That was kind of a rock band at first. But then it switched over. He hired Mulgrew in the 80s and had Wallace Roney, etc. And all of a sudden it turned into an acoustic band. And a lot of guys realized our ship's come back in, you know, we can really play this music again. So it was actually an amazing time to be in New York. I just sort of was getting on the bus back to Maine as that was happening. Too bad. I wish I had been around New York for another couple of years, because all of a sudden, you know, you could hear an acoustic bass player again in town, which kind of was a rare thing in the 70s.
Sure. And you eventually received your doctorate in musical arts with a minor in music theory from the Eastman School of Music. When did that take place? And
actually, after I'd been, one of the great perks of being a college teacher, if you can get it, is to have a sabbatical leave. Not that I'm saying that one of the great advantages is to not teach. I mean, the great thing is to work with young students like yourself. That's the real magic of it. But if you have a project or something that's really important enough, you can compete. It's usually a competitive thing. And if you are awarded a sabbatical, you can do this project and get paid. So actually the university sent me to Eastman to get a doctorate, and I was on half pay for that year. So, you know, it kind of made the whole thing work. You know, you could either take one semester at full pay or a full year at half pay. So, yeah, I went to Eastman, and Karen, my wife, is from Rochester.
Oh, okay.
So she got her master's there, and I got my doctorate. We lived with her family, so I mean, the whole thing was a great setup, you know. And I got to know so many great people at Eastman. It's one of the great schools in the world, you know. And studied with Raymond Ricker there, Ray Ricker, who was a great mentor and teacher, not only in saxophone, but also in career advice. You know, I remember early on, he said, Dave, you know, you've been teaching 10 years. My advice is you're too old to mess around, you know, with all due respect, he said. You're too old to, don't go writing any papers that are going to get put in some file. Write, if you can, engineer every class to give you a paper that then you can go on and try and publish. And for example, the best example of that is my doctoral paper, which was on giant steps and Coltrane's thirds things, which has turned into a Hal Leonard book, a big article, like a 45-page article in the Annual Review of Jazz Studies, which is kind of a scholarly refereed journal, as they call it.
Third relations developments.
Yep, that's right. You have done your homework, correct. And then two different downbeat articles, and a lot of people hire me to come talk about giant steps. Kind of embarrassing, you know. I say, you know, I think Mr. Coltrane can tell you all about it if you just listen carefully enough, but people want me to kind of translate that, and after you transcribe 96 choruses of Train playing giant steps, things start to occur to you in terms of maybe what he was thinking about, his concept, his overall concept of how he created those solos, you know.
Yeah, you're the Coltrane guy.
Well, you know, again, good career advice, you know. Back to Don Stratton at UMaine, he said, you know, pick something and be an expert at it. Because I remember before I went to New York, he brought the Local 802 book, the directory. Local 802 is the union, the musicians union in New York. And it's like a phone book. And I remember there were 30 pages, like a phone book, of saxophone players. You know, and like every few pages you'd see, like, you know, Rollins, Theodore, Sonny, Woods, Philip. You know, you'd see guys, but then you'd see like Woods Philip, Woods Ralph, Woods Ernie, Woods Stewart. It was like, who are all these dudes? Yeah. And they're all doing well enough so that they can, it's worth it to pay union dues. There's, for every one of them, there's probably 10 more guys that aren't in the union that may be great. Yeah. So he said, you know, you got to jump out of this pile. You got to be known. It's not a gimmick. Like, you don't want to be like the guy who always wears red shoes or some dumb thing like that. Sure. But you want something that you've accomplished that sets you apart from the gazillion other very, very good tenor players in New York who also may play flute and clarinet and piccolo and all the other stuff that I play. You know, you got to stand apart. So, yeah, it's good career advice. That was a good, you know, if I had done something on, you know, Mozart's operas or something, so have thousands of other people written papers on those. That music has been studied for centuries, but as it turned out, nobody had ever published an article that really said, okay, here's really what's going on in giant steps. They had talked about it, but they'd never really sort of soup to nuts, like, here's the deal. Here's what Coltrane was thinking. How did the
interest develop in Train? Was it just transcribing Coltrane, or?
I'm a saxophone player.
Yeah.
I mean, when I heard, well, the interest for me started with his sound.
Okay.
That sound. Before I think I was ready to have an oral knowledge of what was going on harmonically. Do any of us understand what he's doing completely? But you know what I mean. And it was just that sound, just him playing the head of giant steps, him playing the melody of, you know, My Shining Hour. It's such an amazing saxophone sound that it just, I said, who is that? I mean, it just sounds so distinctive. One note, it's Coltrane, you know. And so I think that was the start of it. And then, of course, I started. I mean, actually, I have to say, another mentor, somebody that did figure hugely in that part of my life, was Mike Brecker, because I met him and said, you know, I've always wanted to meet you, and I'm transcribing all your solos, and I have this album, and I can do this by memory and all this stuff. And he said, that's great, Dave, thank you, stop stop doing that. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean stop? And he said, great advice again. He said, if you just copy me, you're going to be one of 100 other guys that are just stealing my stuff, and I'm still off doing other stuff. So you'll never catch up. But you're going to be another copycat. But he said, if you listen to who I listen to, then you become my peer. Then it's like you're standing next to me. And I remember saying, wow, that's some heavy advice from somebody that really, he didn't have to take that time with me, because he was already Mike Brecker. He was a first call studio player. The Brecker brothers were the thing to hear in New York right then. This was in the late 70s, like 77 that I met him. And he really hung in there for me, and I had all the stupid, naive questions, and he always had time for all the brilliant answers, For a guy who said that he really couldn't teach, he was a brilliant teacher, And
you studied with him for a while, like
the only time I actually sat down to saxophones was just one study visit, like a 3-day period, where after I'd known him I'd been teaching in Maine for, like around the time I got my doctorate. And I'd known Mike at that point for 15 years, and we were back and forth talking whenever he came to Boston or anything. He'd get me tickets, I'd go, we'd stay in touch. And I said, man, the tension is just killing me. You've never heard me play. And I'm doing all this stuff that, okay, listen to who I listen to. And I said, who? Train, Stanley Tarantino. I went after all these people. I had studied with his teacher. I said, I've just got to play for you. I've got to get some feedback. And he finally said, okay. So that's what we did. And that's really the only time I ever, sax to sax studied. Like Dave plays, Mike plays, Dave gets discouraged, he tries again. And that was an amazing, thank God I recorded it, most of it.
Wow, you have that on tape.
Yeah. And some great exercises where we would do a thing where he said, okay, you stand there and put both hands on your mouthpiece. He stands behind me and puts his hands on my horn and he plays. And my sound comes out, And then we do it the other way around, where it's his sound and my technique. It just makes you realize where you stand, both ways, Yeah, it was an amazing experience. But, I feel like the teaching went on for the 30 years I knew him. And I never saw him long enough, There was this one famous, probably the last long visit I had. The gig is on YouTube. It was a web broadcast of the Tenor Summit at Birdland.
At Birdland, yeah. I think.
And if you check carefully, Karen and the back of our heads are in a lot of those shots. We're sitting right off of Phil Markowitz on piano, and you can see us all through that gig. And Mike spent one of the whole entire breaks with us.
That's great.
Joined then by like Liebman and Joe, and it was just an amazing visit with him, talking about his kids, and it was so miraculous to see how that family had grown, and he settled down and got married. Susan's so wonderful, and the whole life that they'd made together. So a lot of times later the conversation would go more about family and how his kids are growing up and playing basketball with with Sam, his son, and all that. But I still always had my questions. I always had things that something would occur to me, and I'd say, whatever, like invitation, yes. And we'd be into it, and I'd have something about some concept that he had over some spot on the tune, and he'd go, you're hearing that, eh? Like, yes, my son. And he'd lay a little more on me, But usually, it was more general conceptual stuff with him. But as great a person as he was, sad to say the word was, that is exceeded by his humanity. Amazing, kind, generous person, treated everybody the same. Didn't matter if he was talking to Herbie Hancock or me or some 16-year-old kid who wanted his autograph. He was the same guy.
That's real important,
Yeah.
Especially
very important.
In this music.
Yeah. I've always tried to treat everybody the same as well. Again, like whether I'm with some young kid who's visiting the program or whether I'm with Mike, I don't like put on some like, hey, I'm with Mike Brecker, then you're a jerk with Mike Brecker, basically, I mean, I try to be me, that's who you got. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's a good philosophy, know who you are and be that person, just be honest with yourself and other people.
That's really great. Now, I have another question. You're equally comfortable as a classical and jazz musician, having performed with the New York Philharmonic, the American Saxophone Quartet, and the Metropolitan Opera. As a classical performer, what was your favorite group to work with amongst these guys?
I mean, when you're talking about right away, the three groups that you mentioned, that's like saying, who's your favorite player? Sonny Rollins, Coltrane, or or Clark Terry. I mean, you can't. These are three of the greatest. I mean, let's first talk about the larger groups. I mean, the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Philharmonic are the two major musical institutions in this city and major in the world. I mean, I just got done doing 3
Top
months.
Class.
Yeah, I just got done doing 3 months of the John Adams opera, Nixon in China, has 4 saxophones, with John Adams conducting. And I mean, the Met, it's a city, there's something like 8 levels above the street and another 8 below the street. Huge rehearsal halls, scene shops that, I mean, you could have 1,000 people and sit for a basketball game down there in some of these mammoth places. And I mean, the orchestra is, the best players in the world and the on-stage people, but it doesn't stop there. It's the stage crew, the sound people. Everything was just super, 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 Mm-hmm. So, I mean, saxophone and opera, you don't hear those two words in the same sentence very often, but I just wait for the next time I'm needed there, because it's such a great opportunity to just be around world-class people all the way around, from the guy at the front door to the personnel department to the orchestra. Everything is just world-class. Same thing with the Philharmonic. I mean, I did 2 world tours. I was lucky enough to be with the Philharmonic right around Gershwin's birthday, 100th, that is, 100th anniversary of his birth. And so a lot of saxophone orchestral literature was written by Gershwin. You got April in Paris, American in Paris. Mm-hmm. You have, Rhapsody in Blue, Variations on I Got Rhythm, et cetera, Porgy and Bess. And so, I was really sort of constant there. Yeah. And then the American Sax Quartet, another world-class group, led by a gentleman named Albert Regney, who has been the saxophonist with the New York Phil since Bernstein days. Another mentor, person who I ended up studying with him at Eastman for a bit while I was there, and that's how I met him. But, playing alto with him playing soprano took my playing to a whole other level,
Yeah.
Still an honor to still know him. I should be in better touch with him than I am. But, it's all, I've always been of the philosophy that it's all about the saxophone, and I need to have the skills that it takes to be the best performer I can be, no matter whether it's sitting in the pit at the Met, doing something that's very complex and technical and like chamber music, or whether it's playing giant steps.
Sure.
If I need that skill to be a good saxophone player, then that's it. So I don't feel as though I'm a classical player who kind of like hacks around in jazz. I couldn't last a day in the corridors at William Paterson being that way.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not a jazz player who kind of like hacks around playing classical music. I was kind of raised as a classical saxophonist, but now, I've been improvising.
That's awesome.
Since I was,
doing both.
Yeah, hopefully, and, only in New York could you do it at this high level.
Mm-hmm.
you know, when I have one of those weeks where, you know, I'm playing with a great saxophone quartet or playing at the Met, and then I get to play with Mulgrew, God puts us on the planet for those days, those weeks, you know. I mean, it's just a very, very rare opportunity. I don't take any of it for granted. I feel very lucky.
And I noticed with your recordings with the Saxophone Quartet, as well as your Golden Crest solo album, Demsey Plays Wilder, you have a heavy interest in Alec Wilder. Could you tell us a little bit about him and your interest in his work?
Well, Alec Wilder is one of the few composers in history who made a major reputation as a classical composer, you know, wrote for orchestra, brass quintets, woodwind quintets, solo literature, solo sonatas and concertos. But he also was a major popular songwriter, wrote I'll Be Around for Frank Sinatra, It's So Peaceful in the Country, Moon and Sand. You know, he wrote tunes that were premiered by, as I said, Sinatra, Tony Bennett. I mean, major Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, major people sang his songs, and he's a major part of the popular song history of the country. I got to know him, kind of backdoored it. I mean, I thought he was two different guys. I knew I'll Be Around, and I knew that he wrote some sonatas and a couple of pieces for saxophone. He wrote one piece for Stan Getz and orchestra. Wrote another piece for Zoot Sims and a string orchestra. So I kind of knew about this cool stuff that was, I mean, if you see my classical jazz background, it's like, here's a composer who kind of, it's almost like he was writing for me. I unfortunately never met him. He died in 1980. I was living in New York during the last 3 years of his life, but it just didn't, I wasn't aware enough of him to know what was going on. So, you know, then I went to Eastman, and he's from Rochester, New York. Wow. So I met all these people that knew him, that grew up with him even. And he never went to Eastman, but he was a hanger-outer at Eastman. He would always, whenever he was in town, he would just hang around the Eastman corridors, you know. And it's too bad the timing weren't better, because some of the pieces that he wrote were actually for Eastman students. You know, he'd hear somebody that he liked, and 2 days later he'd find him and go, here, this is for you. 3-movement sonata that now is a well-known piece, and he'd just sort of hand it to him. You know, his That's family, amazing. His father survived the stock market crash at 29. He had oil money. So the family had money. He lived at the Algonquin Hotel in New York for 50 years. That's where he lived. And he liked to take trains. And anytime he needed to work, he would just get on a train and start composing and just take the train wherever it was going and stay there for a while and then take, you know, he was like a nomad. True American original, as Gunther Schuller calls him, you know. So I ended up writing, the first thing I did, Alec related, was that album, which was sort of, as you know, just as Alec is uncategorizable, you know, he's like, is he jazz? Is he classical? Is he a pop songwriter? Is he a composer? That album ended up, you know, in the dreaded instrumental bins at most stores, because it was classical on one side, like his saxophone sonata, piece he wrote for Stan Getz, etc. Then you flip it over, this was a good old vinyl LP, 1985. You flip it over, it was a jazz quintet playing his songs. So nobody knew where do you put it, classical, jazz. So it would end up in the instrumental bin with like Lawrence Welk and the Percy Faith and the 1001 Strings and whatever. And you know, I would go to record stores and kind of like move it into the jazz bin whenever I would find it, you know. So then I did that, and I ended up co-writing a what's called a biobibliography, kind of a listing of his music that's all annotated with a biography. Then 8 years ago I did a new edition of his autobiography, which is called Letters I Never Mailed. And I did a whole new edition with a new material and photographs and everything. And now, it sounds strange to even say it, but a year ago I became the executor of his estate. Wow. The attorney in Rochester named Tom Hampson, who's been a great champion of Alec's music for years, he's wanted me to do this. He's about to turn 80, and he's doing great, but he's wanted me to do it for years, and I kept saying, Tom, I'm a saxophone player. You're forgetting you're an attorney. So now he's partnered me up with somebody at his law firm in Rochester, and she and I are kind of running the estate together. She's doing the business end of it, about which I know absolutely nothing, and I'm doing the musical end of it because I know Alec's output. So when somebody asks permission to record one of Alec's tunes, they want a segment of a movie or a film that involves him, they want to take a portion of his book or something, I'm the person that grants the permission. But
Wow.
but my partner's the one that actually does the legalities to take care of it. So yeah, I mean, Alec, it is a major regret because I feel as though I'm a great voice for his music in my playing, because you play his music and you have to, sometimes it's very much like chamber music, and then all of a sudden you got to swing a little bit for 8 bars, and then all of a sudden you're back playing classically again. You have to have this chameleon approach where you change your sound and your whole approach to just rhythmically the way you do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love playing his music, and his legacy is really important to me and to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the legends.
Yeah, I mean, there are just a handful of other composers that have made it like that. I mean, George Gershwin wrote major orchestral pieces, and he wrote, a lot of famous tunes. But I mean, after you get to Gershwin and Alec, you're talking about just a very few. There's some popular composers that wrote a classical piece or two. Leonard Bernstein is another one, who of course, major, West Side Story, wrote major orchestral things, but he also wrote, some great stuff. But, I don't think you can fill up one hand with people who have really made a reputation in both worlds, So, and Alec's probably when you compare Alec's reputation to Gershwin and Bernstein, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, he should be as well known as either of those people, But it's funny, he kind of shunned publicity. Whenever it would be time to really make a publicity splash, he'd always say, I don't want to deal with all these reporters. I don't want to deal with all these interviews. And he would kind of walk away from it. So, partly his own doing, he had some moments that he could have seized upon to really write a hit Broadway show, and he kind of didn't. So yeah, but now it's up to us. So we're doing the best we can. But his music is every bit the equal of those other people.
Of those other guys, yeah. Okay, as one of the leading frontrunners in jazz education, I really consider you.
Thank you.
One of the top guys.
Thank you. Well,
how do you think higher learning has changed with regard to jazz since you first attended school?
Well, when I first attended school, first of all, there were no programs in jazz. There were only, William Paterson started in 72, 73. Then there was Berkeley, North Texas, Miami, Eastman, a couple other small programs, just a handful of things.
Sure.
But it was, there was the world of the teachers and the world of the musicians, and the twain didn't meet, There weren't that many real, no-kidding, major league jazz musicians who were actually actively teaching. And there weren't that many jazz educators that could actively, no kidding, really hang at any kind of level, And actually, Clark, Terry, and Billy Taylor, and just a couple other people were really the pioneers there. And that was before my time. That was in the 60s, really. But it took a while for the seeds they planted to kind of come to fruition, And Clark was one of the first people, as I said, along with Billy Taylor, who also was involved here very much. We miss him. We just lost him about a year ago. Yeah. And he taught here during the summer, especially for the summer camp, and it was amazing to be with him and to learn from him. But they were the people who said, this music's going to go away. This music's going to die if we keep it kind of like it's our music. This is secret music. This is only the music of the musicians, and we don't want you to understand it. Nobody's going to care whether they understand it within another generation. So as I said before about Clark, you know, his whole mission was bringing the good word, you know. And some of the awards we have here, you know, he has the key to major cities, he has Grammy awards, you know, major worldwide awards, but some of the other awards are, you know, Clark Terry Man of the Year in some little town in Michigan. Or Clark Terry, it's Clark Terry Day in some little town in North Dakota. Because he had gotten on a plane, gone there, and spent a week working with that group of high school kids or college kids that probably couldn't play Come to Jesus. And he made them, took them to a level that they had never even dreamt about, you know.
That's awesome.
And did it to such an extent that they did the only thing they knew how to do. They gave him the town. You know, like here it is, the key to the city, Clark Terry Day, we're gonna have a parade. You know, he's the hero for so many thousands and thousands of people, you know. I recently had a great honor of helping Clark and his wife Gwen, who did such an amazing job, finish his autobiography. Just came out a month ago. Clark, the autobiography of Clark Terry, University of California Press. It's everywhere now.
Check it
it's
out,
Amazon.
guys.
Yeah, check it out. You can get ebook, Kindle, the whole deal. So there's no reason not to have this thing. And Clark got involved with us at sort of the last stages of this, and I kind of read it and saw where it maybe needed some more information and would interview him, like about Count Basie or Ellington. What was it like on the bus, on the band bus with Duke? What was Johnny Hodges like? What was Paul Gonsalves like? What was Duke like? Basie, these people. And so when the book was about to come out, they asked me to write one of the introductions. And I come to find out the other two people they asked were Bill Cosby and Quincy Jones, right?
Wow.
So I mean, when you hear the names Bill Cosby and Quincy Jones, what's the third name you think of? Of course, Dave Demsey. What? Who is this guy? So
You're one of them. You're one of
yeah,
the
right.
tops.
Oh yeah, I always tour with Bill and Quincy whenever we go out as a threesome now. We have the same security. So what I did was I wrote my introduction as everybody else, you know, because Quincy Jones was one of Clark's first students in Seattle when Clark was there with Basie's band in the early 50s, you know. We have a recording here of the Basie band, one of the original 10-inch recording, that is a gift to Clark from Quincy in 1955. It's signed on the back to Clark, you know. Yeah. And so Quincy wrote it from that point of view, having known Clark as his mentor for whatever that is. You're talking 60 years ago now. Bill Cosby wrote it as somebody who knows Clark as the cultural icon he is. He's not only one of the great jazz trumpet player of all time, but he was the first African American on network TV. A lot of people think it's Cosby, but and he certainly was one of the first stars of a TV show with I Spy, with Robert Culp. But Clark was sort of the go-to guy in the Tonight Show band. First was Skitch Henderson directing, and then when Johnny Carson took over, Johnny wanted to move it to L.A. He did move the show to L.A., and Clark was one of the people that made the decision not to go. He had so much work in New York in the studios that he didn't leave. And there was this young guy in the trumpet section, Doc Severinsen, and Clark, he got the gig out in L.A., and everybody knows who Doc Severinsen is. Yeah. But Clark was basically Doc. He was the on-camera person.
He's the founder of a lot of great music. If you think of his inspiration of cats like Miles.
And Miles was another early student.
Is like the father of influencing Michael Jackson, for example,
which
is all that stuff. So I mean, I think Clark is really important.
And Quincy brings up the point. One of the testimonials to Clark's book on Amazon is by Snoop Dogg. What's that connection? Well, Snoop Dogg thanks Quincy for putting him on to Clark, and he says, you know, Clark is one of the original rappers. Clark's whole thing about mumbles.
Mumbles, yeah.
It was going on from the 50s and the 60s, but it's not just a guy having some fun singing like an old incoherent blues singer. There's like a whole political subtext to it that we can sort of understand, but you can't quite understand. Slightly X-rated, but in fun. You know, it's a whole, it's what the best of today's rappers are doing. So, you know, Snoop Dogg, I mean, there's inside talk about Snoop featuring Clark on one of his albums. That would be killing. That would be the perfect tribute for Clark.
That's gotta happen. That's good.
Yeah.
We gotta push that.
So some of the you know, the leading guys in the whole rap field are recognizing Clark. So anyway, they, you know, Quincy and Mr. Cosby know Clark for these things. My point was, you know, I'm like 1,000 other people, 10,000 other people. I was in a band. Clark came to town. He knocked all our socks off. I was playing lead alto, and I got better overnight just playing with Clark and having him lead the band. I played a gig while I was up in Maine with Clark and me in a rhythm section. I talk about in the introduction, I said, you know, we had a 2-hour rehearsal for this gig. We got on stage, we didn't play one of those tunes, not one. Clark had a sense, this sixth sense about what we knew and what we didn't know, and he took this band of young guys from Maine that he was playing with, and he took us about 2 inches past the edge of the cliff and just stood us out there for 2 hours in front of an audience. And I never played better. I still listen back, and from my recordings from that time, there's nothing from that time that sounds anywhere near that good. And it's Clark, you know? Yeah, so, you know, my point with my introduction was, I hit the lottery. I'm the 1 in 10,000 that Clark helped, but now I happen to be here when Clark chose us for this archive. So I get the chance to go over to his house every day, help catalog. You know, I would have when they lived in Haworth, New Jersey, before they moved to their present home in Arkansas, you know, I'd finish my 12:30 class and go over there and have breakfast with Clark. He just, you know, he was on like jazz hours, you know, getting up at noon, going to bed about 4 in the morning. So I'd go over there. I was on the 4-meal-a-day plan, you know, go hang out with Clark, and then I'd crawl around on the floor with my laptop and catalog, and Clark would be there. You know, like I'd pick up and go, oh man, he'd say, I've been looking for that for 20 years. Where'd you find that? You know, so I was unearthed. It was like an archaeological dig over there, you know. That's all annotated, and of course a lot of those items now have become part of the archive, all cataloged, and you know, so I'm on sabbatical this coming spring 2012, and one of the major projects is going to be putting it all on a website so that you can see all this stuff that we have. So you can see, you can study this flugelhorn like it's in your hand, you know, like we can rotate it around, and you know, we're gonna work with Lois Gilbert, who's wonderful, great friend of Clark and Gwen's, but she runs jazzcorner.com. Which is Clark's host website, Freddie Hubbard's, it's the Rufus Reid's, etc. Many great artists are there. So yeah, it'll be through the university's website, but it'll connect to Jazz Corner at the same time. Because Jazz Corner has capabilities that no university website would, as far as, you know, technically, you know, video, audio, clips and stuff. So.
Okay, just a couple more questions.
Okay.
These are the real questions that I've been asking a lot of cats in the Jazz Musician's Voice, my series. There's talk amongst musicians that there are too many young musicians coming out of jazz school, and that it's flooding the scene for older and more established musicians who are having a hard time finding work. What do you think about these comments from your educational background and starting from a time when there wasn't any jazz education in schools?
Well, I mean, I think in a way that's true with a lot of things. It's not a jazz problem, you know. The world is flooded with CDs to the point that it's better just to make them and give them to people. The world is flooded with audio, with video, with media, everything, you know. So I think that the great musicians are getting the work they deserve, and the great musicians will always be working. I think that, you know, in New York, there may be some club owners that, you know, all they want to do is put music in the room, and they would rather hire a group full of 22-year-olds and pay them with dinner than hire Mulgrew Miller. There's always going to be that. Sure. But I think the high-profile clubs are still hiring the people that deserve to be heard in those clubs. And I think as far as, yeah, there are more and more talented young people coming out and playing this music, but God, isn't that what we want? Yeah. You know, what that really means, I mean, a lot of our students don't stay in New York. They go back to San Antonio or San Francisco or Philly or Chicago and become a bigger fish. They left as a kid and they come back as a young professional musician with a lot of gigs and a lot of students and, you know, a great website, and they've kind of established themselves. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, probably in like New York and Boston, where you've got Berkeley just cranking out, Berkeley and New England cranking out all these players, and in New York there are at least 6 really good jazz programs. I'm sure that some New York established musicians feel a little bit like there's this tidal wave of young people, but I don't think it's a major problem nationally. I think it all equals out in the end, you know? Yeah. I mean, to that extent, I hope that more established players, you know, the schools that are happening now, what we're doing is doing our best to replace the old mentorship system, where you'd go to what they called the University of Art Blakey, or where you'd be with Horace Silver, or where you'd be with Betty Carter, or all these, you know, Miles. They have a reputation for hiring young, great young players who are unknown and making them into professionals, you know. Sure. That's not happening as much anymore. And so I would say that yes, maybe young people are flooding the market a little bit, but also they need the mentorship that some more established players could perhaps provide more, rather than just, you know, there are some players, I'm not criticizing anybody in particular, but there's some players that are playing with the same people they were playing with 20 years ago. And it's their own band with their name on it. It's not like it's a cooperative band that should be together, you know. And I'm not, again, that's great when a sort of an all-star group gets together. But it's also great to sort of give young people the same exposure that those established artists may have gotten when they were young, you know.
Okay, well, before we finish up, do you have any advice for jazz fans / musicians watching this interview, with your vast experience and knowledge?
Well, for students, well, it's, you know, my advice might be the same for both groups for different reasons. Listen to the music. Just listen, listen, listen. Because for a young student or an older student, this is still an oral tradition. And, you know, yes, I did publish the whole book of Coltrane playing giant steps, but that book and no recordings of giant steps will buy you absolutely nothing, you know. The important thing is to hear that magic, hear the magic of creation as it's happened on record, you know. Sure. And then for a jazz fan, I'd say the same thing, you know. You can buy CDs, you can watch it on YouTube, but there's nothing like being in the room while the music's happening, you know. And there's a jazz venue in nearly every American city. There's jazz if you seek it out. And, you know, it's our legacy, it's our art form, you know. There's that great, you know, Gerald Early, great historian, teaches at Washington University in St. Louis. And he said, I may be missing this quote slightly, but he said, when they look back on American culture in 2,000 years, there's only going to be 3 things that we did that were of any importance. jazz, the Constitution, and baseball. Those three things. And I mean, for him to mention, you know, our form of government, baseball, I mean, I'm a great baseball fan. We'll use up the rest of your disk space talking about baseball if I go there. But, you know, jazz is part of our country's legacy. The whole blues-based thing is one of the great contributions we can make. And I don't know how many times I've been in a situation where somebody comes up after a gig and goes, you know, I don't like jazz, but I love that. And usually what that means is they don't like listening to jazz on CD.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like watching baseball on TV, you know, like watching some guy scratching himself again or adjusting the Velcro on his gloves. But going to a baseball game, going to Yankee Stadium, going to my beloved Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, all these new, it's amazing just to be there and see the game played and be able to watch all the stuff you're watching. It's the same thing. Being in a jazz club, being in a concert hall, and knowing that you bought your ticket and you really, not only do you not know what's about to happen on stage, that the musicians walking out there don't know. That you're going to see something that's a one-time only thing. It's never going to happen again. That's magic. So yeah, I guess that would be the best advice I'd give anybody. Listen to music live if you can. It'll change your life.
And any upcoming performances of your music or of you playing?
Well, at this point, having just finished the Met Opera thing, I do have some stuff. I've been subbing lately with a band led by a saxophonist named Dick Meldonian, and the whole band, I'm the youngest, I mean, I'm 56. I'm the youngest guy in this band by at least 20 years. And all the people in this band are guys who used to play with Kenton, Woody Herman, et cetera, et cetera. And Dick Meldonian was in the Stan Kenton section. He was playing lead alto, and the second alto was Lee Konitz. Zoot Sims was in that section. And these guys still want to play, still sound great, but they don't want to get on planes. They don't want to have to, you know, so they're doing it for fun. So, yeah, that's almost every Tuesday night, Emerson, New Jersey. Cool. It's like a total mentorship learning experience, and I get to play lead alto at the same time. So I'm doing that a lot. And, of course, there's stuff that's going to happen in my sabbatical, too. I'm doing a thing in Maine. I'm doing a couple of high school residencies in South Jersey. I'm going to be playing more because I'll have the time to.
Cool, you know. Cool. Well, how can people apply to William Paterson's jazz program? Because I know you are
the best way to do it is to go on the website, www.wpunj.edu. William Paterson University, New Jersey, wpunj.edu. And if you go to academics and then go find the jazz program, there's an answer for everything. We have an FAQ page, we have sound clips, we have photos, we have a list of prominent alums, we have a faculty list with bios, the curriculum, everything. And then the big thing is, and this would be advice for anybody looking at any music school, visit the school. You know, I mean, our website hopefully will be informative and be a clear thing, but don't believe it. You know, come see it. Come sit in on one of Mulgrew's classes or Harold Mayburn's classes or, you know, Marcus McLaurin, Steve Laspina, Vincent Herring, Rich Perry, all the great John Mosca, all the great people that we have teaching here. You know, meet the students, hear the high level, and then go check the other schools out in New York.
Sure.
And what is going to happen is one of those schools is going to nail you. One of those schools you're going to say, that's the place for me. So the big thing is get on the plane, get in the car, and make the commitment to really finding the right school. That would be my advice for any applicant.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Demsey,
my pleasure.
for giving this interview.
da 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 da